Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This big a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of SurrealEstate. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, there's a property that Susan's kind of handling where you have like Duncan and Sophie, and obviously being your douchebag influencers, just like having to be like, oh, I'm an influencer, and it's like they're just so picky about what they want, and it kind of sucks for them because it's like, right, it's based on they're getting paid in commission in this regard, and so like the way the contract is set up that basically they can pull out at any moment in time and kind of screw them over, and the agency, you know, Roman and them don't end up the Roman agency in totality doesn't get to get paid, so Susan kind of has to bend over backwards for them. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, like the mirrors are weird, and then she's like, well, because Sophie was saying like, oh, the walls are weird, and Susan's like, but they're your mirrors, and she's like, yeah, but so they work fine other places, it has to be the walls. It's like they're just so like high maintenance and everything. So obviously Susan had to get them out of the house, be like, oh, spa or whatever, because initially Luke is like, okay, get Phil and August out there, and it's like, you said to never let Phil and August around like the clients or whatever, and it makes sense because it's like you kind of make them a little wary. I guess Megan was the exception because like the crazy stuff had already happened, so it's kind of like, all right, being around, that's fine. But it's like, all right, it's like, okay, Zoe, you're gonna drive Susan out there, and she's like, oh, and gonna dump her body, and he's like, this is why we don't have an HR, and he's like, road trip. And I love that in the background you can see like Zoe's like head like hitting the table, and just, you know, Susan smiling like, road trip. Once again, it's like every time those two take a step forward, they take like a step back too, so it's just like not one to, because even Zoe's like, okay, I know what Phil brings to the table, I know what August brings to the table, I mean, me, it's self-explanatory, but you, why did Luke bring you on board? She's like, I'm a closer, you are overhead. I'm like, oh boy. Like, once again, just kind of like cats and dogs in that regard. But they ended up staying the night at that particular property just because it's like, right, some of the spooky stuff happens at night, so we got to stay overnight to like, you know, figure out what's going on. But they end up bonding. Obviously, Susan kind of opens up about like, right, her like pyrokinesis situation, and obviously Zoe's like, no way, that can't be the case. And it's like, yeah, it is. But it's like, the only people that know are some people who've experienced it firsthand. Luke, as well as her mom, are like the only other probably like non-people who haven't experienced, well, she might have experienced it herself, or at least her mom might be aware of it, but Luke at the very least is aware of it. So there's also that interesting conversation about soulmates. She thought like Bob was going to be her soulmate and everything. And it's like, right, he's kind of a dick, and I was just so caught up in it, but I thought he was my soulmate. That being the dude that was going to leave his wife at the beginning. Well, reason why she kind of now works at the Roman agency, just because like her last job, it's like, oh yeah, my boss kind of fired me because he like, I'm curious, are they going to cross paths with him eventually? I'd assume, because that'd probably be like, you know, competition of like, right, because it's the same field of business, so it's like they're eventually probably going to cross paths in some shape or form. So but other than that, there was like I said, the conversation about soulmates and stuff like that, but Zoe doesn't believe in them. She thinks of them as mythical beasts like Bigfoot or Tom Cruise. But it's like we kind of open up, we kind of, you know, finally get a little more insight into Zoe. We find out a little bit about her past, her soulmate, that being Kyle, like someone she met in high school. Like, she was like, I was different around him, you know, I was like happier, I was wittier. I think she said I wore pastel like once. But it, you know, she left that town to go off to college, but Kyle didn't, hurt his back during doing construction, got hooked on Oxy, started dealing to pay for his addiction, and ended up, you know, dying, you know. So, and it hit her pretty rough, you know. Even to this point, that was still like that special to someone. I was like, oh, that's a very heartbreaking like backstory, like, you know, for it to be a situation of like someone that did meet, like, especially if he was the reason why she was like, yeah, I was different around him. Like, if, you know, it's always sad when things, I mean, this is the most extreme version of that, like in the sense of like when things don't work out with a person who makes you feel differently. I mean, once again, like I said, this isn't the circumstances they broke up. It's like, no, like he died. Kind of like his story just played out very tragically. It makes you wonder, is Zoe the way she is now a byproduct of that? Or is it just like, this is who she was with the exception of being around Kyle, and then she kind of, maybe it's that thing of like, she probably opened up a little bit more, was kind of, as she said, like a different person, but then went back to this after Kyle, maybe even doubled down when it came to this, so. But obviously they are dealing with the whole ghost situation. There's a whole bunch of sailors. Susan started like coughing up like a whole bunch of water, which I'm like, maybe that wasn't, well, because I'm pretty sure, because it's like Duncan and Sophie, like why that never got brought up. Maybe they thought like, we're going to be sounding crazy or weird if we bring that up. Like, I'm pretty sure that was them at the beginning too. Like she definitely experienced it, but she didn't, like I said, not unless that was a different person, but it's like they experienced it and no one said anything about like the weird stuff. I mean, except for some of like, oh, Susan handled this, like, oh, there's this like leak somewhere because there's these weird water footprints everywhere. It's just so interesting that it just never came up. But I guess it's that thing of like, right, I must have been dreaming or out of my mind. Like probably just chalk it up to that. Like, oh, it wasn't weird. I mean, it wasn't real. It was just some weird dream or just kind of hallucination I was having. So I guess that's kind of what it got chalked up to. But Phil looking into it, it kind of explains like the whole like Susan seeing the dude on the horse thing and everything. So looking into the history of the place, that house, where that house is, there used to be an old lighthouse, and the poor dude went off to meet his wife in town, accidentally stayed overnight, and woke up, the lighthouse wasn't on. He tried to rush back on his horse, and by the time he got, like, the ship had already crashed, like over like 100 people had died because of it. So it's like, oh, that sucks. So the only way to stop this is if like kind of appease the ghosts, like kind of their unfinished business of like, because they're stuck in this cycle of, right, the lighthouse that didn't light the way and we crashed and died and now we're haunting this place. So it's like, right, we need to make this like a lighthouse, but like the light they have there isn't enough. And Susan's like, I got this. I was like, wait, is she about to do? And then she full blown like magics it. I wasn't expecting. I knew the pyrokinesis. Like, oh, we're about to see that shine. I didn't know what to expect from that, because like when I think pyrokinesis, I don't think, I guess just in my head, I think of like you can set something on fire. I just never think like you can like straight up magic fireball this. I mean, she literally just channeled it like that. I just didn't expect it to manifest like that. I don't know whether I thought she was going to do like a phoenix type of thing of like legitimately her whole body was going to light on fire and just be like a shining star type of thing. Her shooting up a fireball, I was legitimately flabbergasted. I do not say that word lightly. That's not me exaggerating. I was blown away, because I was like, I didn't expect your pyrokinesis to manifest like that. Once again, maybe that's just because I have my thoughts of what pyrokinesis necessarily looks like, but I guess it, like, as long as it's you literally summoning fire, I guess it could technically manifest. But that just looked so much more magic based, because I guess in my head when I associate like telekinesis and pyrokinesis, they're like psychic abilities. So I think more on a science fictional side of things, where does that look like on the more magical side of things. But to be fair, this is kind of like, this show is built around like the supernatural and stuff anyway, but just, like I said, that just caught me off guard. And they were able to steer the ship away. So it's like, yeah, that worked out. So that place is no longer haunted. Duncan and Sophie are happy, so, or at least for now, so they are getting, well, I don't know if they necessarily said we were getting paid, but at the very least, Duncan and Sophie are happy for now, so we'll see how that kind of plays out. But once again, just every episode, it does seem like we are getting like that bond between Susan and Zoe. Because I also thought it was so interesting, too, when she was like off on her own this episode, like before, like, obviously, the agency got involved in it. But I guess that's the point, because Roman kind of handles a lot of stuff on his own and obviously brings in the team when necessary. But same thing for Susan, because I was thinking like Susan seemed like she was so disconnected from the team in certain regards, but it's like, no, it's just because her and Roman are the ones who do the more face-to-face meeting with the clients and stuff like that, so the rest of the team doesn't necessarily get involved in that facet of the business. So it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. It's just, like I said, Luke does the same thing, but it just always felt like Susan was a little disconnected from the team And maybe that's, obviously a little on purpose, both within the confines of the business, but also just how Susan operates. But she is trying to make herself more of a team player. Like, once again, her mom called her out on her, like, BS, like, in the first episode. So, something of that vein. But, the other side of the episode deals with what I thought was kind of interesting, and considering their job and everything, it's basically they're trying to. They're usually just dealing with high-end houses. Now they were trying to deal with like a whole like estate of situations of like a whole bunch of like almost like a cul-de-sac of like all these houses that look the same. It's like almost like a neighborhood of houses. It's like kind of handling a volume type of thing, which is so interesting. But basically it ends up being like there are multiple houses being affected by the same affliction, so they're all kind of being haunted. In particular, they end up investigating and finding out that all of these houses, the ones that are being affected, are a very specific type of house, because there's like 6 different types of houses amongst all these like houses. First and foremost, I love the whole thing where like Zoe's kind of laughing and then Phil's like, "What are you laughing about?" And she's like, she's like, "I thought you said hi." Like, she said something a lot like farts, and then like she's the only one laughing and everyone else is looking at her like, "What?" And then she just kind of like she's like laughing, and then she's like stops and kind of just looks down like, "Oh, I guess I'm the only one that found that funny." But I also love like I said, the competition where it's like Roman meets up with Greg and he's got Phil and August with them, and like the kind of Phil and August equivalent are kind of across from them as well. So it's like, it's like this Western standoff that they have, which I think is pretty dope. Like I said, considering the business that they're in, of course, they're going to like have rivals. It seems like him and Greg had like a rivalry, but also there's some past that gets referenced this episode that, Susan asked about. But he's like, "Oh, let me tell you that story some other time." And I'm like, I'm wondering what that circumstance is. Because Greg's like, "Oh, you're just pissed because of this particular farm property. It was something farm." He was like, "Yeah, like that. I got that." Like, I don't know what that was necessarily about. But, basically, the only reason why Luke was brought in, because he was like, "Greg, you don't even believe in all the stuff that we, like, investigate stuff." He's like, "Yeah, but my boss's wife does. She believes in seances and crystals and all that shit." So it's like, that's why I kind of ended up bringing you in. So I need you to look into this. And it turns out that these Delaware houses were built with sunrooms. The CEO that Greg works for ripped off those ideas from his partner, Bernie, who died a couple years earlier. So that kind of explains some things. So Roman goes to check out his place that he kind of died in, and it was the first property like he had built with this sunroom. And it turned out he had built it for the woman he loved, Lucy, who ran off with his brother. And I'm like, "Oh, cool." And the night gets a little deeper, because then his business partner ended up ripping off his idea, and now like every house that has a sunroom, these Delaware houses, every time like he like does his thing, like trying to drop the tree on Roman like he did, it seems like whatever he does to his property, it happens to other properties. So when he's stomping, it causes an earthquake at those other properties. So he's the reason why it's all happening, because he's in so much pain that basically he's lashing out against anyone that lives in those houses. Like, I'm drowning in this pain, they're going to feel my pain too. I'm not going to be the only one who has to suffer. Now, the situation puts Roman in a very compromising position, because for him, it's like he kind of feels bad for the guy, because he's like just a grumpy old man whose heart was broken. But then it's this situation. Then August was kind of like, if I'm not crossing a line, he references like a Travis property, and you're like, what went down there? Because immediately Roman's like, you have a point. I'm wondering if it was a situation of, it was kind of a similar thing of there's a ghost that, it doesn't seem like Roman's quick to do the whole kill them thing. He wants to like be able to help them peacefully move on, because I think maybe there was a situation where he was like, no, we don't have to do this. Let's try and find another way. And maybe there was some casualties, or at the very least some people got hurt as a byproduct. Because obviously Luke has mentioned it, that there were situations, was it like last episode or episode before last, where they referenced that they didn't, I think it was the Harvey episode, where they didn't handle something the way they should have, and people in the house died. Like, as we had seen that opening to the episode 2 in that regard. So there's probably been similar other instances, not necessarily of that vein, but of a somewhat similar nature, and it maybe in particular closer to this situation with Bernie. But August kind of suggests something, and it's like basically like, here's this device. It will basically kill him. It's death for those who are dead. So there's no like afterlife. There's no moving on for them. Like, this is just pure spirit death, which is like the truest. Like, that's like heartbreaking. But it's like, once again, Roman doesn't want to hurt the dude or kill the dude, but he might not have any choice because there are like families and children involved in this situation. So like, Bernie's lashing out, but other people could suffer the consequences of it. Like, people could die because of it. So, but Roman ends. I keep calling him Roman. Luke decides to sit down and talk to Bernie and try to actually help him out. And so they end up finding out that Bernie owns the copyright to the sunrooms. So obviously when they're contacting Greg, I love the whole thing. And like, you can hear Bernie in the background. It's like, yeah, he built it for the woman he loves. I hope she burns in hell. And it's like, yeah, it turns out that he holds the copyright. Obviously, copyright laws hold up for about 70 years. And so technically representing his estate, like Roman, keep doing that. Luke and them can sue Greg and his boss for stealing that copyright and all the money they're making off of it. So it's basically like, okay, the cheaper option is to like morph it into non-sunrooms. That way, that's your best option. Or you can basically let us sue you to oblivion. And I love that, once again, Bernie in the background, that means suck it! So, obviously this screws over any working with them. This is kind of their opportunity to be in the bigger game, in the sense of like, right, working with this group, because Greg was like, yeah, you get rid of this guy right now, you get I get a promotion out of this, and I'm gonna make sure you get taken care of. Like, oh, think about all like the money that could come your way, because they'd be moving multiple houses at once. They'd be raking in the dough, because it is a volume thing, which even August wasn't too fond of the idea from the beginning. Oh, none of them were, like Phil either, or Zoe, because it's like they're usually working on, like, yeah, they might be working on multiple things at once, but it's never like a mass property like that, because it's like, it's almost like there is no soul to the neighborhood, because it's almost very like, oh, every house is the same, and it's just kind of like, there's no individuality. It's just kind of what is the word? There's conformity in that vein, and they're not kind of fans of that. But I think Luke kind of got blinded a little bit by like, right, like this would have been us kind of taking the next step, but it's like, it kind of wasn't worth it, because your principles aren't your principles until they cost you something, you know. Essentially, it's like you don't really realize, you know, like that you're like, until it starts being a thing of like, right, there's a cost to like going against your principles to a certain extent, that it's like, right at that moment, that's when you kind of realize like, oh, your principles are your principles, and they're set in stone for a reason, and why you shouldn't kind of budge on them, like even when kind of a large cost and large amount of money is kind of being thrown your way, essentially. So it was a very interesting circumstance in that regard. But like I said, I am curious what that story is between him and Greg. Like, what happened in that regard? That was it something like, oh, you stole a property from us, and it kind of turned into a terrible situation because you didn't let us do our thing? Like, it doesn't seem like it's just kind of like a, oh, you stole a property from us. Just purely that. It feels like there probably is a lot more to that story that we haven't gotten, but I'm curious about that. Another angle to this is the whole Megan thing, which she's trying to, like, it seems like ever since last episode, Luke has been ghosting her, which she was like, how ironic that is. And I love that he's like trying to text, and he's like, no. Another text, no. And like, she's seeing the 3 dots like for a while. I was like, okay. And he just sends a smiley face. I'm like, yikes. But he does talk to her later on. I guess he kind of opened up. He kind of talks about it a little bit, like, right, I can't really go back to your place. It's awkward being there with you and her. I don't know if he went into the specifics of like, hey, I have seen my mom here, or is Megan still under the impression like, oh, this was the last place your mom was, and it's still kind of associated with that. Which the team has kind of done a good job of not bringing that up. They figured it out last episode of like, they found out from Megan, like, his got family connection. But I guess it's also like everyone in that a part of that team has their circumstances that they don't really talk about. So, but I guess it's like Luke tries to treat himself like, says like, like I'm an open book, when in actuality he's an enigma in certain regards. So, but I guess that's also why, like, Susan didn't push it too much, because she was just like, yeah, maybe both are true, that, his mom is associated with the place, but also he likes Megan. Like, she kind of left it at that, didn't push it too much, I guess because of her own circumstances, but also no one else has really pushed that since last episode, so that's why I'm like, I guess they're just giving Luke his space to kind of bring it up to them naturally. They don't want to kind of force his hand. But regardless, Luke is talking about the fact is that, and it corresponds with what I brought up last episode of, like, the irony of he's helping people trying to move past their past, but it's time for him to take his own advice. I mean, especially because it happened. I mean, that's the whole nature of his business, but I mean, obviously even more so in this episode, helping Bernie move past and even move on in this regard. So, he's got to take his own advice. So for him, it's like, like, here we're at my place, and Megan's like, do you want me to, he's like, do you want to come up? And she's like, do you want me to come up? And he's like, it's super scary, but yeah, because everything his mom said last episode, I think, really shook him to his core. Once again, I think she said all that on purpose, but we'll see kind of where all that ends up taking us going forward, especially, like, if him and Megan become serious and what that means in the grand scheme of things. I'm really fascinated to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good